As the summer was drawing to a close, a small group of children went to play in the historic grounds of Wollaton Park. It was around dusk, maybe a bit later, on the 23rd of September 1979, when some of the children in the group, aged between 8 and 10 years, wandered into a fenced-off area that was known as the Swamp, a boggy area that people were not supposed to go in. The other children didn't follow as they were too scared to go into the swampy, wooded area. Those that had were interrupted from their play by a strange noise coming from the woods. They all looked up as something was jumping in the treetops. They then heard the sound of bells ringing, a sort of tinkling noise. This scared them and they ran. According to the children, they ran as fast as they could, and one of the boys was nearly caught when he accidentally tripped over a log and fell into the swampy water. Suddenly, according to all the children, about 30 little cars appeared with 2 little men in each car. The cars, they described, were red and white and looked a bit like bubble cars, with strange triangle lights. The engines made no sound and the wheels left no tracks in the mud. They proceeded to chase the children, all the while laughing. According to one of the girls, the cars seemed to be going about 40 to 50 miles an hour, but to one of the boys, they drove fast, at least 120 miles an hour. The cars, they said, made a funny sound, and they could jump over logs and ride over water. The children described the little people as very small men, similar to a dwarf, that looked old with wrinkly skin and long white beards with red bits at the end. They couldn't talk, they only laughed and seemed friendly. On their heads they had a green hat similar to an old sleeping cap with a bobble on the end. They wore yellow trousers or tights and a blue thin top. One claimed they apparently followed the gnomes when seeing them come out of a hole. He also claimed the yellow trousers were ripped and had patches on. He claimed they were both in the trees and on the ground, and had blue-green things on them. One of the boys said the cars didn't have a steering wheel, just a round thing with a handle on it to turn it. They mentioned being a bit scared, but managed to run to the gate, and one child mentioned the gnomes didn't seem to like the lights, as they didn't follow them into the street. When they were asked if it was the first time they'd seen the gnomes, one answered that they had seen them once before, but they had run away into the bushes. When was this sighting? The reply was, in the 6 weeks holidays. 3 of the children were questioned about this strange and unbelievable story. They kept to their version of events, and when questioned separately, the stories matched, to a certain degree. They seemed pretty sincere in their claims, and according to their family and teachers, they all agreed they were not usually the sort of children to make up silly stories. Although they had told their parents once before when they claimed to have seen the gnomes in the 6 weeks holidays. They hadn't believed them then, so why should they now? There were some discrepancies in the children's stories. One of the boys claimed the gnomes had black beards, differing to the claims from the other 2 that they were white beards. He also mentioned the cars being green and blue, not red and white like the other 2 mentioned. The one main question that bothered the head teacher and FIS writer, Marjorie Johnson, was how did they manage to see so much detail with little light? According to the written statements, one of the boys claimed to have seen them because the colours of their clothes made them easier to see, and another child claimed there was a light in the sky. Marjorie herself proclaimed that fairies have their own light surrounding them. The swamps, as the children called that area, were close to a busy road. Although walled off, the street lights would still give off enough light to see. According to the children, the whole incident lasted approximately 15 minutes. It was looked into and thought very unlikely to be true. The then groundkeeper, who had worked the grounds for over 50 years, thought the children were just pulling someone's leg, as he had never seen or heard anything like that himself. But there is, according to some authors on the subject, a few inconsistencies about where the children went that evening while on the park. And I, for one, don't doubt that the whole story could be based around the boy being caked in mud and afraid he would be in big trouble. It was also getting late, so that might have played a part. The fact that they were trespassing, well, that might have been another reason for them to be cautious. But why would they make up such a sensational story, knowingly placing them at a place they shouldn't have been? Including the school grounds, a place where they said they had been passing through on the way to the park, an area where they knew they should not have been at that time. At least the older ones would have known that. But then again, we have to remember their ages. Would they even think about trespassing issues? Personally, I don't think they would. They were out having fun. That's what they were bothered about, nothing else. But there are those who absolutely believe the story. The FIS, or the Fairy Investigation Society, was founded in 1927. The leader and one of its founders of the group at the time was retired British naval officer and scientist Quentin Crawford, who had a passion for the paranormal, and it operated up until a few years before the start of the Second World War. In 1947, Crawford, at the age of 72, restarted the society, and in 1950 Marjorie Johnson from Nottingham, who had been a member since 1936, became the secretary and FIS newsletter writer. She apparently transformed the organisation. Before joining, she had been collecting accounts of fairy sightings independently for many years, and she herself had apparently been seeing fairies since she was very young. Her collection of stories, called Seeing Fairies, was finally published in German and Italian. Eventually it would be printed in English, but not until way after her death in 2011. She was 100 years old. At the time, the FIS group had over 100 members. Among those members were some very well-known names, such as Walt Disney, Lord Dowding, an influential member of the British spiritualist, theosophical and animal rights movements, Irish writer Walter Starkey, pursuer of religious and mystical questions, author Wellesley Tudor Pole, George Legler, creator and builder of the Valley of the Moon, June Kynaston, author of Nude Dancing for Health, artist and animal rights campaigner Marion Crowe. After 5 years into her work with the Society, Marjorie began a survey with folklorist Alistair Alpin McGregor. They wrote letters to various newspapers, asking them to contact them if they had any reports of fairy sightings. McGregor would abandon the project in 1956, and the findings were not published for many years. Marjorie put a lot of herself into the Society. She would, if she could, go to the places herself to see if she could experience the same events the letter authors wrote to her about. But after 15 years, she left the Society after some unfortunate misunderstandings or misinterpretation made from an interview she gave, claiming Marjorie had spoke of fairy sex. She was angry and upset about this reference, and the Society slowly went into decline from the 1960s and was more or less defunct by the 1990s. Going back to the Gnomes of Wollaton, of which Marjorie Johnson gave a statement to the local news that it was entirely possible the children had seen the gnomes, stating, "I should imagine they are quite genuine," and that fairies had been reported being seen in Wollaton Park at the lake on a number of occasions. Now there are caves under Wollaton Hall, apparently the Admiral's Bath being one, where it's claimed a member of the Willoughby family, who happened to be an admiral, supposedly took a daily bath. It's not unusual to hear they have caves. After all, the city is known as the City of Caves. What were they used for? Well, apparently they were used in many different ways: storage, wine cellars, work environment, cold storage, even home dwellings. Wollaton Hall was built between 1580 and 1588 for Sir Francis Willoughby, an industrialist and owner of coal mines. In 1925, the hall was bought by the council, and it would become a natural history museum a year later. Although the caves open now and again for tours, I don't believe they were open in the 1970s, so they could have once upon a time housed some rather little people. Whether it was a fun tale they spun to their parents for whatever reason, or completely true, it captured the imagination of many people. The local paper posted a story in 1979, and the children had some fun with it. But as the years go by, the story of the Wollaton Gnomes has continued to capture the imagination of many. It's been talked about for years. Books have been written trying to make some sense of where the children went that night and what they may have seen. Investigators of the supernatural have tried to trace the steps of those little imps, but as far as we know, the Gnomes of Wollaton Park never revealed themselves again. As for the children, they grew up, and as far as I know, they didn't talk about the subject again. It's difficult to say, as they haven't come forward as adults to talk about it. At least I can't find any evidence of them having done so. When I mentioned this story to the youngest in our family, he put me straight on the subject, adding, "Well, of course they saw them. They're Santa's helpers, getting the reindeers ready for Christmas." You know what? It could be right. The park is famous for its reindeers wandering around the grounds. Either way, it's a delightful story to come out about the historic hall and the grounds of Wollaton Park. Thank you for watching.